of my enduring frustrations about national politics and everything at this point as a member of the Democratic Party, is that we've pointed out that the party switch happened in reaction to the 1964 Civil Rights Act numerous times, only to be hit with this attempt to shake their fingers and say nah and exist in a state of denial about the objective reality where the party switch did in fact happen, and those who don't accept it are merely in denial. The argument that they made was essentially only Strom Thurmond switched sides in reaction to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But that argument falls short of an actual debunking because the main people who switched were not elected officials at all. The debunking they tried of the switch was actually rather pathetic because what they did was say that only they say that among actual elected politicians, only Strom Thurmond switched sides. But it's like, okay, but what about all the people who never even ran for office and just participated as voters? That are now what are they, just suddenly not relevant anymore? To the discussion about the party switch and everything. We know that this did happen. It was concentrated mostly among white Southern conservative voters, activists, donors, local elites, and eventually many state/local officials. Many of these people we do not know the names of because they were not prominent or noteworthy enough that historians would have, basically thought them of importance enough to write their names down. These were people who lived in obscurity, and everything. And, so we know that this did happen after the 64, Civil Rights Act. This is an objective reality and an observation of national politics that, those who refuse to accept this are merely in denial, and because of who it happened among, and everything, it's easy to object, with what I would consider like a spurious objection to the argument, which let's, when I say spurious, I mean it appears relevant, but in fact isn't really at all. It's illusory, which is to say, Strom Thurmond is the only, person that was prominent on the national stage enough that, we would know that he was a segregationist and that he switched, parties in reaction to the Civil Rights Act. This strawman fallacy that they're deploying against uh, the thing is to say that, to pretend that those that, insist that the party switch did happen are, ultimately arguing that, this switch was evidenced by the fact that, the switch of the Southern, Democrats that were in Congress at the time, the actual elected officials. But that's not at all what most of the people that, insist on the party switch have actually argued at all. Which, what we're saying is that, conservative disaffected whites abandoned the Democratic Party in droves after the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And, LBJ's rumored concern actually proved pretty, we don't know that he actually said it, but if he did, it proved prescient because, we had, in fact, lost the South for at least a generation after that, and are still paying for it to this day, and everything. And, so this break and everything that happened in politics when the parties switched sides and the realignment happened that made the parties basically stand for completely different things than they used to. In 1964, this was largely a reaction to the Democrats and embrace suddenly of civil rights from a left wing point of view and everything, and us having become civil libertarians and everything for other groups of people. Now, I happen to live in the North, and so, I am a Democrat and everything, but I'm like a civil rights, supporting Democrat and everything. And, so I see, despite the fact that I'm white, and it's part of my own identity, but I mean, I see it. And it's there in the data. A lot of these people were not. A lot of these people lived otherwise in obscurity. We don't know their names because historians didn't think them important enough to write them down. But they were, Republican activists and boosters who fought for the party and voted in its elections. They were white voters, so this did in fact happen, and the data for it is pretty overwhelming if you care to go look for it.